This is episode 6 of a series where we examine the cut content, design, and development of Fallout 3. One of the most notable changes between the classic games and Bethesda's first entry were skills, as many of the original skills were either scrapped or revised. For example, the first aid and doctor skills were combined into the new medicine skill, while other skills like outdoorsman were cut out entirely. Intriguingly, an early preview for the game reveals that Bethesda actually considered one of the more obscure skills from the Interplay releases. We didn't get an explicit rundown, but we were told that there are 14 skills in the game, with familiar ones like small/big/energy gun, speech, and gambling listed among the few quick glimpses of the character screen. In Fallout 1, 2, and Tactics, the gambling skill increased the player's odds of winning various games like slots and roulette. However, there are only 13 skills in the final game, which is interesting since we already know the throwing skill was cut too. Unlike throwing, there is no remnant of the gambling skill whatsoever though, and it's unknown where it could have been used, as there are no mini-games outside of lockpicking and hacking. This suggests that it was either cut very early, or Bethesda went out of their way to delete every single remnant of it. Gambling was relatively limited compared to other skills in the original games, and I can definitely understand the reasons for cutting it. Like previous games, the number of action points the player has is derived from their agility stat, but Bethesda vastly increased the amount of available action points and their cost. In the first two games, you might have 7 or 8 action points per turn, but with the right combination of items and equipment in Fallout 3, you can have well over 200 action points. Originally, AP was more like the Interplay games though, as an early preview revealed. But to prevent you from just abusing the heck out of VATS, and in a throwback to the turn-based combat of the previous games, each shot in VATS cost action points. In the demo we saw, each shot took about 3 APs and the player had 9 total, meaning he could try for 3 aim shots at any moment. Howard said they're still fuzzing with the exact system, but at the moment, AP automatically recharges over time when playing in real time, with the recharge speed dictated by the player's agility stat, but that recharge rate is slowed down a bit when you're just shooting stuff. A pre-release image confirms this, depicting a player who intriguingly has 7 agility and 8 out of 8 action points. Using smaller numbers would have made it easier to keep track of how much AP you had, and I'm genuinely curious why they altered this, let alone increasing the number so drastically. There's an unused actor effect called Kamikaze, a reference to the Kamikaze trait that appeared in the original games and later in New Vegas. There are no traits in Fallout 3 though, and its name reveals it would have been a perk that increased the player's AP by 10, but decreased their damage resistance by 20. A few other classic traits were altered into perks like Bloody Mess and Finesse. I love the way traits offer the player a bonus that comes with a consequence, and it's too bad they didn't implement more of them as perks. The Life Giver perk increases the player's health by 30 points and can only be taken once, but there are 2 cut additional ranks for the perk. I suspect this was altered late in development because one of the in-game loading screens still references it, stating, "With each rank of the Life Giver perk, you gain an additional 30 hit points." This idea didn't go unused in the end though, as multiple ranks of the perk would later appear in Fallout 4. There's an unused image for the Light Step perk that's similar to its depiction in the classic games, but it would later be replaced by this version that features mines instead of bear traps. There's also 9 icons that represent the player's derived stats, which consist of carry weight and action points, critical chance and damage resistance, hit points and melee damage, and poison and radiation resistance. However, there's no way to actually view your derived stats, and each of these goes unused. The healing rate icon is particularly interesting, as the player doesn't heal passively in the final release, but its existence suggests they considered a variable passive healing rate that was likely affected by endurance. The Vault Boy status faces are individual files that are stored in the Textures folder, and the way they're numbered suggests that nearly half of these faces were cut from the final game. It's unfortunately unclear what status effects these apparently deleted images once represented though. There are some extremely interesting mock-ups of the Pip-boy menu that were made early in production and are still left over in the BSA files. The red color scheme is the most obvious difference, but there are numerous other differences compared to how the menu ended up. The first image depicts the local map for Megaton, and the map icons are significantly different from what appears in-game. The second image shows a world map view of the Citadel, which was apparently called the Pentagon at this stage of development. On the top left, we see the coordinates the player is at, or perhaps the coordinates of the area the player is looking at on the map. The next shot shows the quest screen, and none of these quest names appear in the final game. The Citadel is once again referred to as the Pentagon too. You choose the current radio station from a list in Fallout 3, but another image shows they initially considered having the player actually tune in to various radio stations. I can see why this was altered to the way it appears, but it's so cool to see these artifacts of early development. The last image shows the notes interface and has a note called Vault 112 Tranquility Lane that reads, "The vault is occupied by the descendants of the original dwellers themselves. These 200-year-old people exist as seemingly comatose husks plugged into a giant supercomputer called the Simtech 6000. This reveals the Tranquility Lane simulation pods were originally powered by a computer called the Simtech 6000, and this is a reference to Fallout 1's manual. Section 2 of the first game's manual is called Simulation, and the image for this chapter depicts a Simtech 5000 computer. It goes on to tell you that the entire game is a simulation, but this was meant as a joke and not as canon. Including this would have been a great homage, but even the thought really shows how much of a love letter Fallout 3 is to the classic games. The official guide for Fallout 4 continued this joke tradition on the contents page stating, Vault Tech liability information. These scenarios were developed through scientific projections obtained from roughly 15 million documented tests using the Simtech 5000, Vault Tech Science Services' most advanced post-nuclear simulation. This image also mentions a picture of Dick Richardson, the Enclave antagonist from Fallout 2. As far as I know, there is no picture of him though, and he's only ever mentioned in dialogue. To end this episode, we're going to take a look at various cut props that would have appeared throughout the Capital Wasteland. There's an unused fusion generator and a destroyed version of it in the game files. There's no hint as to where they would have appeared or why they were cut, but the undestroyed version would later be reused as part of a side quest in Sloan and New Vegas. There's an unused photo of the player's parents, and I'm guessing this would have appeared somewhere in Vault 101. Perhaps this was cut as they would have needed multiple versions, as the dad NPC's appearance changes according to the player's race and face. It ended up getting used inside one of the rooms in Vault 21 in New Vegas though, and it seems likely that the developer who placed it didn't realize what it was. Another unused post-war photo shows Project Purity, and perhaps it would have been found at Vault 101 or the Jefferson Memorial. There's also an unused photo for the Tranquility Lane simulation that I'm guessing would have been found inside one of the houses. There's an unused high-resolution version of a television, and it's possible it was meant for the intro cinematic, similar to the intro that appeared in the first game. It was used during a trailer at E3 2008 where it showed off pre-war commercials. It seems this was made specifically for promotional purposes and was never intended for the final game, as the back of the television was never completed. Obsidian would later reuse the television in New Vegas, but never finished it either. It was used well over 100 times, and they just placed them in ways so you can't see the back is missing. In the Museum of Technology, science tease an area called the Halls of Today, but this exhibit is blocked off by rubble. Intriguingly, there's a cut sign that reads Halls of Tomorrow, suggesting the museum might have a cut exhibit that displayed retro-futuristic art. Though if I had to bet, I think this would have been another inaccessible exhibit too. There's an unused rusted sign for an inaccessible bank. There are 5 inaccessible banks found in the DC ruins that use different colored variations of the sign, and perhaps this rusted version was intended to be a prop in one of the many cut DC world spaces, but that's a story for another video. There's a cut sign for the Our Lady of Hope Hospital, and it likely would have appeared right outside the location. This would have been a nice decoration, and it's a shame it was left out. There's also a billboard that advertised Paradise Falls that was strangely never used anywhere either. I forgot to mention this in the Outcast video, but there's an unused banner that was likely intended for Fort Independence and potentially other Outcast areas as well. It uses the Nuka-Cola banner as a model, but its name suggests this was only a placeholder and that they intended to create a new asset, at least before the Outcast were regulated to an insignificant role. There's a pre- and post-war model for what's apparently a LR3000 lawnmower. There's also remote controls for these mowers that likely would have appeared near them. I really love their design, and I wish they had been included in some capacity. There's an unused prop called a recycler. It's unknown if this could have been used in some way, perhaps transforming junk into useful items, or if it was simply a set piece, but either way it looks dope. There's an unused model for a garden hose that I'm guessing would have been found in a variety of locations, and this could have been a nice little addition. There's a display version of a Mr. Handy robot that was meant to appear at Robco facility. There's also cut display models for the SentryBot and Protectron, which likely would have appeared alongside it. There's already a room that features 5 Protectrons on display there, and presumably they were once planned to be found in this room as well. There's quite a few unused pieces of graffiti that were intended for Raider-controlled locations. It's unclear why they were cut, considering they match the Raider aesthetic pretty well in my opinion, with lines ranging from Lucky You to Mama Tried, cannibalism for healthy teeth and gums, and my personal favorite, by the time you're done reading this, you're dead. During the side quest Agatha song, the player recovers a long-lost violin inside Vault 87 for Agatha, an old woman living out in the wastes. There's a cut empty case that used to contain the violin. It's unknown why this wasn't placed in Agatha's house, as this is a great-looking asset. Finally, there are unused large and small gear decorations intended for the Mechanist lair. These look really cool, and they could have made the area more visually impressive. Some of these changes would have made Fallout 3 into an even better game. Ultimately though, all of this was left on the cutting room floor.